Welcome to this Omnibus edition of Happy Times and Places, the positively inclined Doctor Who episode commentary podcast in which I, Toby Hadoke, watch a story chosen by a friend of mine and see if I can guess what their favourite things about each episode might be as I commentate along and drop in facts and observations.
Hello, Toby. You join me in the fertile, featureless fenland of Cambridge. Thank you for inviting me to take part in this excellent series. I'm a massive Doctor Who fan, and I could wax lyrical about the virtues of Tom Baker and Matt Smith. But today I'm choosing a slightly more complex topic, shall we say, something which is an episode, a story which is not always regarded as highly as I think it should be. I want to talk about Attack of the Cybermen. This is the story that rekindled my love of Doctor Who. I was a massive fan of Tom Baker. I wept like a bereaved child when he regenerated at the end of Legopolis. And then I kind of dipped in and out of the Peter Davison era. I didn't watch the Peter Davison, Colin Baker regeneration. I didn't watch Twin Dilemma, but I turned on in, I think it was the January of 1985, and I watched Attack of the Cybermen, and I was hooked, and then I loved the whole of Colin Baker's first full season. One of the reasons that I tuned in and decided to pay full attention to this new Doctor was my father, Roger Bunce, sometimes a special feature on Doctor Who DVDs. My dad was working on Time Lash. He was also working on Revelation of the Daleks, and he told me that he was really enjoying them and he was really enjoying Colin Baker as the new Doctor, and he got me Colin Baker's autograph. I've got it up in my loft, I think. I would have pulled it down, but you know, life is short and loft ladders are long. So there it is. My reasons are very personal. I hope you will enjoy watching Attack of the Cybermen, and I'll see you after episode 1, where I will be selecting 2 of my favourite aspects of the show to talk about, hopefully in not too much length. Enjoy the show.
Well, welcome everybody. The voice you just heard there introducing Attack of the Cybermen was Robin Bunce, who is, among many things, a very smart and gifted academic, resident in Cambridge, doing all sorts of, invoking all sorts of popular culture of the kind we love in his academic studies. And in fact, his father, Roger Bunce, sent me a treatise Robin had written about, or mentioned to me about Evil of the Daleks back in the day. Roger was very proud of Robin tying in Roger's academia with his love for a programme that Roger himself worked on. Roger was a BBC cameraman who worked on stories right back in the day and was an enthusiast. He did indeed appear on DVD extras, including on the commentary for The Web of Fear, a story which, when it was returned and was showed at a London cinema, there were invited guests: Deborah Watling, Ralph Watson, Fraser Hines. I was delighted as I went. I was chairing the Q&A and saw Roger queuing up like a customer, which he was. So I was delighted to be able to go, we're going to throw some questions out now to somebody in the audience, because Roger Bunce was the cameraman, and he worked with most of the classic Doctors. He did a Who's Round for Me, which was a 2-parter. Lovely man, Roger, who died relatively recently, and is one of those people, people will die, and people who are older than you will die. But Roger was such a sort of cheerful, ebullient sort of character, and always answered an email, always signed off, cheers, love Rog, love LUV, and was so sort of keen about preserving the legacy of the BBC, furious about the sale of TV Centre, but also, I imagined him drinking real ale and being outside with a sort of short-sleeved body warmer and having a penknife in his pocket. I don't know if he had any of those things, but that's how I imagine him. A real enthusiast, a lovely chap, always very helpful, and just always there. So and we knew he was ill when we did the Web of Fear commentary. But he seemed to be... anyway, look, it doesn't matter. But I do miss Roger, so I can imagine how bereft the Bunce family have been feeling these past 18 months or so. So very kind of Robin, who I've actually, I don't really know. I've had more of a relationship, via emails than anything else, but that is the way of things these days. But I know that he will bring an intellect and an intelligence to his appreciation of Attack of the Cybermen, a fantastic perspective from somebody that, as he said, interestingly, he loves Matt Smith and Tom Baker, but he wants to fly the flag for Attack of the Cybermen. So let's go back. Doctor Who is riding high. We've just had the 20th anniversary season hot on the heels. The 21st season hot on the heels of the 20th anniversary special, when Longleat House had queues and oversold, and there was a 20th anniversary special, then a follow-up season where we had what has been voted the greatest story of all time many times, The Caves of Androzani. Peter Davison going out on a high, handing over the reins to an exciting new Doctor, and they'd had the experiment with the Resurrection of the Daleks, which was edited together into 2 longer episodes, and that made it have a sort of epic kind of feel. I remember when that was on. So that's what they decided to do with this season. Oh, amazing. So, I mean, Doctor Who was riding high at this point, and by the end of the year, it was a very different story. What an interesting time to be alive. And this is very much in my memories and experiences of being a young Doctor Who fan. So let us see what is in store for us as we... Tomb of the Cybermen didn't exist at this point. So a very exciting return to the planet Telos with the Cybermen who've made such an impact when they returned with Earthshock. So let's see as we go to press play on Attack of the Cybermen in 3, 2, 1. And I've pressed play. There we go. What's going to happen now? Doctor Who's going to start after a hiatus. And it's starting very... I might keep this in. No, I can't. And I am going to start in 3, 2, 1. So, how exciting is this? So full disclosure, I was, as a kid, I was not a massive fan of Peter Davison, largely because he was not Tom Baker. I adore Peter Davison now. He's probably in my top 3 Doctors. But I was very excited and delighted by Colin Baker, whom I had enjoyed in Arc of Infinity. He'd managed to make his role in that of guard captain one of the most memorable parts. Capital letters for the opening title captions, which is very interesting. Watch when I say interesting, I'm being anything but. So, what I love about Doctor Who is even in the 2 obvious cannon fodder characters, we've got some very Eric Saywood dialogue. More bulges than an antenatal clinic. It's him trying to add a bit of adultness to Doctor Who. But here is Stephen Churchett, who died very recently. I was furious I was unable to get him an obituary in The Guardian. He was not only a character actor well known to modern viewers because he is Marcus Christie, the in and out solicitor of Dirty Den Watts, who had a long in and out history with EastEnders and a memorable character who'd generated some column inches when he returned relatively recently. But also as a writer, had a play at the West End, Tom and Viv, and also... which did really well at the West End. It had Michael Gambon in it, but also then went on to write numerous episodes of the likes of Inspector Morse, including The Remorseful Day, the last one. So you would think he had done enough to earn his place to be given 700 words by me, but sadly did not. I believe Anthony Hayward did one for the Telegraph, so at least he got somebody competent giving him his dues. Anthony is a fine obituarist. Stephen was very high on my list of people to do from Who's Round, even though that's the end of him, although we do see him actually being cybernized a bit later. But that's pretty much his contribution to Doctor Who. But I love the fact that people like that, even, as I say, the cannon fodder, the people that are there, if you're a seasoned Doctor Who fan, you know, are going to find something suspicious and die horribly. And you need actors to play those roles, and hopefully it's good ones. And I love it when it's ones with a story to tell. And I was always delighted to see, that guy who gets killed at the beginning of Attack of the Cybermen has, become an acclaimed and esteemed writer of high-end stuff that, has been seen and consumed by everybody. And so sad, and I think slightly cruel, that, although of course it makes no difference once you're dead whether you get an obituary in the newspapers or not, but it's the sort of thing that I think is important. I like people to be given their due, which is why my life's work seems to have been to be pointing out what you might have seen somebody in elsewhere, so that you can at least acknowledge their life outside of their brief sabbatical in Doctor Who's bill. It's an odd peccadillo, but one that but one that I, for some reason, it's my kink, baby. Don't kink shame me. So here we have Colin Baker, who is the first Doctor I ever met, and he does all. He's a very theatrical Doctor, but actually this sort of television is slightly theatrical in style. The performances that you give with this sort of way of making television are very different to what you give now. And I actually did a short film recently where I was playing an 80s TV hero called Inspector Wen. So my casting was a bit of a joke, and I actually did the little touch on the nose thing that he does with that he does with Perry. His Doctor is certainly, I mean, the costume, I never minded the costume, I do look at it now and go, I can see why it's one of those choices that does that when somebody is dressed like that in front of 1980s scenery, it does look slightly sort of artificial and draws attention to itself as a piece of artifice and try-hard fantasy. But I actually never minded it that much as a kid, and I like the idea of the sort of Doctor being tasteless. But what I do like about this adventure, and I certainly think the bits that hit me as a kid, I was desperate for Doctor Who to be grown up. That's the thing about a program that is associated with children, is that as a you never wanted to be Luke Skywalker, you wanted to be Han Solo because he was the older, cooler one. And I like this. I loved Terry Malloy's putting his finger in his ear acting there, because that's the sort of thing people do in things like the Sweeney and not in Doctor Who. So seeing it in Doctor Who, everything is tonally here rather reminiscent of the programs that grown-ups watch. I was allowed to watch grown-up programs. My mother and I have always had something of a tricky relationship, but I have to say she was always very open to us being capable of digesting forms of entertainment meant for older people. She trusted our intelligence and never hid anything from us. I remember a friend of ours being shocked to come round when The Young Ones was on and I was watching it. So I always felt that if something reminded me of the grown-up programs, and this does, the film stock, lest we forget, it's not long after this that Doctor Who goes on to being shot on videotape outside. I really like film. This, if you took this scene now with Terry Malloy being sort of furtive and undercover on the phone and talking about kilos of plastic, that all feels like it's from a grown-up show about organised crime and terrorism, and and because it's reminiscent of Matthew Robinson's last production, Matthew Robinson, the director of this, where you have policemen with the guns with silencers on mowing people down in the street. That all felt like the sort of stuff I wanted from my Doctor Who. I wanted it to be more real and less fantastical. Now, as I'm a little bit older, and you can see this series in context of where, what they did with Earthshock, which was the most amazing thing to behold as a kid. The Cybermen as a surprise, the death of Adric, and then Eric Saywood realised, oh, okay, this people like this stuff, and then you have a similar thing with Resurrection of the Daleks, where again you got a director who was really sympathetic to it and did the grittier elements of it very very well. You can see why in Eric Saywood's mind, well, why don't that's the tone we should have? But of course, the reason Earthshock works really well is because it's a bit of a shock, and it stands out. Whereas this season, tonally, it does really enjoy its grimness and its violence, and misses the fantastical. And where the fantastical is, of course, is it's Colin Baker's costume, which is a slightly uneasy fit, and it's not a dissonance that is necessarily helpful. But I'm intellectualizing. I have to say, I love all of this. It's a very 80s suit that Maurice Colborne's got on, isn't it? But I love these actors. James Beckett, who plays Payne, is one of those actors that you go, oh, I've seen him in everything. And then you look him up and go, oh, I've never seen any of those things. And he's got one of those faces that makes you think you know him, when actually he wasn't in an awful lot. And he was also one of those actors that we could never find. But some friends of mine recently had cause to chat to Matthew Robinson, who I've never met, and they said, do you know whatever became of James Beckett? He said, oh yeah, I'm still in touch with him, I talk to him all the time. He actually mentioned he might quite like doing a Doctor Who event, and so he's been sort of hiding in plain sight, totally unaware that because there are a few of us who I've mentioned, myself, Ben Jolly, Stephen Griffiths, the Phantom Films lads, Paul and Dexter, who are very keen on tracking down and talking to, and Richard Bignell too, on tracking down and talking to some of those actors that we've never quite traced. And they're not all, although two of them are from the first Dalek story, they're not all from the early years. Actually, they come up to be quite recent, like the Lucosa. But James Beckett was one of those mysterious ones who we never knew. But there he was. He was hanging around all the time. As I speak, I don't think he has yet done that event, but I think moves are being made to contact him, and he's perfectly cast. And even his name, James Beckett, it's like, oh, well, that's a bit like James Beck from Dad's Army, but it's not. But they're similar sort of types as well. So it seems he's a sort of conglomeration of all sorts of things that are familiar, and yet they're all wrong. You don't actually know him, and he wasn't in that thing. Lose the Motor. I love all that. I love the way that this is shot. This is shot very authentically on film, with the way that these guys are costumed. I like Terry Malloy in this. And I do like the murderous silent policemen. I think they're glorious at the moment. We will go on to discuss them later. But they were a particularly scary thing of Resurrection of the Daleks. And I know that I always get this. I have this theory that Eric Saywood kind of deliberately pushes his luck. So, you know, he knew the history of Doctor Who. He knew that Barry Letts had got in trouble for having Auton policemen. He knew that Philip Hinchcliffe had cut out Noah begging to be killed in Ark in Space, and so in Resurrection, and then in this he has killer police people. In Revelation of the Daleks, he has a character beg his daughter to kill him. You know, it's almost like he's going, should we see if we can do the things they didn't used to be allowed to do? And I admire the pushing of the envelope, but equally, what seemed very gritty to me as how old was I? 11-year-old, and I love a submachine gun and all of that, but I also love. I love Brian Glover's. We will talk a lot about Glover. That thing, that's obscene. I love. I believe that and this kind of slightly adult, just that sort of adult window dressing. I'm with you, Mr. Litton. I love the banter between these guys. I think it works. Eric Saywood's dialogue doesn't always work, and better. People than I have sort of pointed out where his characters say things like, they must think us fools, instead of you must think I'm an idiot or whatever. But I actually think he does this sort of macho bantery stuff quite well. And I know that in and of itself is slightly awkward to watch, the sort of celebration of, especially when so much drama of these days was, middle-aged men arguing in a room. and lots of other sorts of people and characters not being represented. I understand all of that, but I like that thing about I used to use one of these when I did the council. This time it's for swinging, not for leaning on. That's a nice line. It always reminds me of my friend Alfie Joey, who is a lovely comedian, a presenter on radio on BBC Newcastle, and one of the friendliest and nicest guys that I've never seen lose his temper, except he gets infuriated with lazy council workers. I don't know what happened. Maybe he was kidnapped by some as a child. But I remember driving past some roadworks, and they were probably just discussing what they were going to do next. We couldn't believe how many of them were there, and I just remember him out the window going, "Do some work!" And he's honestly the nicest man on the planet, but that was his hill. That was his kink, was to yell at people he thought were lazing on the council buck. So that line always reminds me of Alfie. Oh yes, oh my goodness me, this is talk about Eric Saywood thinking of pushing buttons in terms of trying things that haven't been done or haven't been got away with. This tease that we're going to lose the police box. I remember being so angry with that idea, and I don't know if when your production team has an eye on courting the fans, whether having an eye on pissing them off is a wise move. But now obviously I'm in these boots don't fit me. I love Brian Glover. You court the fans and then infuriate them. Actually, fans and I probably deserve to be infuriated, resistant to change, and always looking over my shoulder for something to be cross about, which in life and in Doctor Who is a lesson I still often haven't learnt at times, and I wish I would. And when I see other people do it, I go, oh, come on, loosen up, enjoy it. And yet this physician sometimes needs to write himself a prescription of that kind. But I'd have loved that, they've mentioned Tegan and Zoe and Susan and Jamie. Oh, this is exciting. And because any connection to the past, because the past was not only another country, it was where you definitely want to spend your holidays. Whereas, of course, this is in the past now. And, we can look at it from a slightly more detached and from a distance. Where I understand, the terrible Zodin as well. I do understand the people that find Saywood's approach questionable, and yet I can still sort of see them as a kind of guilty pleasure, particularly the sort of violence and the scares. That was the sort of stuff I really wanted in Doctor Who at that time, partially because I got the sense that my school pals, certainly there was that thing of people favouring the A-Team, and the A-Team people seemed to like because it had explosions and violence. So if Doctor Who was violent, it was like a riposte to that. It was like, look, this is grown, because I equated violence with grown up. Whereas, of course, some of the most effective moments are things that are done by suggestion or things that you don't see. There is always a feeling that, or maybe it's just a feeling I'm having now, that Colin Baker and Nicola Bryant spend an awful lot of time in this season walking towards the story. So I know they're trying to trace that signal or whatever, but they're not getting an awful lot to do except to sort of bicker at each other. And then in Vengeance on Varos, they've got that stuff where they run out of fuel and sit and argue. Revelation of the Daleks takes it to a perverse extent where they don't get to the story till the end of episode 1. And it does feel like Saywood is more interested in his guest characters. But I think part of the appeal of Doctor Who is that you get to meet a whole load of new people in each new story, and you get embroiled in their fates, and part of it is a guessing game of who you're going to root for, who's going to survive, and the Doctor and the companion are often conduits to other people's stories, and I sometimes feel I'm oddly sometimes less interested in the regulars because I sort of take them for granted, and I'm not quite sure I'm not sure I've come to terms with how I feel about that. And I'm also not sure how I feel about some of the sort of slightly forced comedy. I think Colin Baker is a is a perky enough performer that some of this sort of contrived comedic stuff is not necessarily as much fun as those involved think it is. I don't know, but he's always. I think Colin Baker's great at this. Mind racing stuff going on while something's going wrong, and I think he exudes a sort of keen and rather testy intelligence, and he's got a forcefulness and a presence that sort of overcomes the costume, and he's too much of a gent. I know he's sort of said, I would quite like something more austere, but I wonder how. I think our image of his Doctor in his era would be very, very different if he wasn't in that costume, sliding doors and all of that. But and that's supposed to be the I Am Foreman scrapyard as well, isn't it? I totally overcome that. Well, at least they spelt Foreman right. But yes, it was getting to the point where there's a lot of. Yeah, let's give the fans what they want. But unless you get it absolutely bang on, those very people that you think you're serving are going to be furious. And I remember that there was a lot of that going on the time where, they were giving you something, but they weren't. Yeah, there was some sort of compromise. We've brought back the Silurians, but we don't know what their third eye does. Or whatever. We've brought the Brigadier, but we've got the dates wrong. And then you kind of go, well, what was it therefore worth doing? And as I say, I loved anything that was a reference to the past, even though I hadn't seen the past. And I think that was false nutrition. So this is a pretty grim death for poor old Payne. So he's gone, James Beckett, but hopefully appearing at an event near you soon. And I do like those. I do like those characters. Oh, and it's an organ, and they do a joke, don't they? It's quite fun, actually. The TARDIS changing shape, and I'm pretty certain Colin worked out this bit of business. I think he told me that when he was the first Doctor I met. I'm sure I've told this story, so just keep it brief. If your first Doctor you get to meet is Colin Baker, in fact, the first famous person you as an impressionable and nervous youngster get to meet is Colin Baker, then I think you're very, very lucky, because I was, and it was an experience that was better than I could have imagined, and that was down to the generosity, decency and conduct of Colin Baker, who is a wonderful ambassador to Doctor Who, then as now. And this is where we get, it's the sort of waywardness of tone, I guess, that's the interesting thing about this period in the show, because I love these silent policemen. I think they're really spooky. They're a really good presence in Resurrection. And here we've got a comedy moment where he raises his hands and lowers his hands. A comedy whacking great inverted commas moment where the Doctor puts the hat on, and as you say, the joke is that Perry could have shot him in the face. You just think, I think somebody needs another eye on this, just ironing out that sort of stuff, because it's tonally, it's a dissonance that, as I say, isn't helpful with the drama. It's slightly odd, but and I think they're slightly undermined, these two coppers of Lytton who they come back at the beginning, and you think, oh great, they're going to be like they are in Resurrection of the Daleks, where they do that horrible bit where they chase Tegan and then shoot the man with the metal detector on the edge of the River Thames, and they're grim and silent and stalky, and now that's them sort of dispensed with, and I remember feeling that was a bit of a shame. I think this stuff now is very good, but I remember being furious at the time, because I'm from a time when the Target books had on the back, the Cybermen, they have the strength of 10 men or whatever, and they are indestructible, and the idea was that Cybermen, how thick is it, less than you? he's almost like Eric Saywood has sort of tried to clone Chris Boucher, but his the photocopier he's used to photocopy Chris Boucher hasn't quite got enough toner in it. But I do like this scene, and I think the setting of the sewers is nice and atmospheric. But again, how many sort of continuity things are being piled on and piled on? And let's not even get to the mystery of who wrote it. And I did suggest looking for Paula Moore, although my belief is that the lady in question was never going to give an interview because it would have compromised the royalties that she was getting, because they actually did a very naughty thing here by ascribing it to a writer who had nothing to do with it in order that the script editor get to write the scripts. That is slightly, not done. There's a reason that there are rules with the Writers Guild in the BBC, and it's to protect the interests of its members who are freelance writers. But you don't need a lecture on that. But I do love the black camouflage Cyberman too. I think that's a terrific idea. But Paula, this hasn't been reported actually, but Paula Moore is dead. She died a few years ago, 2 or 3 years ago. But I only found out way too late to do any sort of piece about it or announcement or anything like that. But yes, I'm afraid Paula Moore or Paula Woolsey is no longer with us. So we will never hear from her about exactly what went on from her end. Were she ever allowed to or prepared to say so? I love this. I think it's just that simple conceit of going, well, let's have a Cyberman that's black. And I love the fact that Griffiths hasn't listened and he's sequestered a gun. I was furious with the fact that the Cyberman was damaged by bullets. Bullets can't stop Cybermen. Cybermen. That to me was as a kid who was very keen to be furious about stuff. It's what gave me an identity. You're nobody if you've got nothing to be righteously angry about. And I loved being furious about Doctor Who. I didn't. I hated it, but it, as I say, it made me feel as if I had some drive, as if I was alive. There's nothing like having a resentment to be able to give voice to enunciate all those complicated feelings that are coursing through your veins as you're a youngster, and the things that I thought Doctor Who was doing wrong, much as I still tuned in every week and pored over the research and blah 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 blah. But it was an enunciation of more complicated things going on inside. I love that scene now. I think it's really nicely directed. I still think if you're going to bring back the Doctor's enemies, the ones who are famously impervious to bullets, don't have them pervious to bullets, even though a bit of spraying green goo is always fun. But I love that music. I love the throbbing, heartbeaty music that Malcolm Clarke does. Although I think elsewhere in this story, the score is very almost parodic, and again it's a sort of dissonance in tone where almost people are going, oh, because we can have a bit of fun with it, we should. But I think the different levels on this set are great. I think the Cybermen in the shadows are great. I think the Black Cyberman is a terrific idea. I'm sad to see the policemen are now being cybernized, especially as also so that we know that they're the same people. They've still got their policeman's. Has he still even got? I didn't look properly. So I think they still got his policeman's helmet on. I think when you're undergoing cyber conversion, they'll probably take your hat off. But Stephen Churchett is there as well. He said he'd got terrible spots that day, or terrible cold sore or something. So he wasn't over the moon to be doing it, because essentially it's sort of supporting artiste work, isn't it? Riften 5, I like that. But the idea that a whole planet will be inhabited by people who all have a similar characteristic is low ambition in terms of, I think, Doctor Who and world building. That the Earth is a planet, and different cultures and different people have all sorts of different characteristics. So the idea that everyone from that planet is one thing is strangely limiting, but not unique to this. David Banks, I love. I miss Mark Hardy. I find Brian Orrell's Cyber Lieutenant not quite as... Mark Hardy's got a slightly more rasping delivery, so I I prefer my Hardy Cyber Lieutenant to my Brian Orrell Cyber Lieutenant, because Orrell's diction is slightly like that. Whereas Mark Hardy is like... Anyway, I'm not going to stop doing Cyberman impressions. David Banks, I love. I think he is such a key to the success of the Cybermen. That's a beautiful shot. I remember there being a brilliant picture in Doctor Who magazine of that Cyberman's head and this sort of valley in the background, and it's absolutely glorious. I love this location stuff, all this smokiness, and I think, and it's very. I mean, I hadn't seen Tomb at the time, but those valleys are very reminiscent of Tomb, aren't they? And we come to an auspicious moment. Pat Gorman here in his last, I think, appearance in Doctor Who, one of the greatest servants to Doctor Who of all time, getting killed there in Doctor Who for the last time. Pat has been in it since his Dalek Invasion of Earth, his first one, very, very early, so recognisable in so many, Pertwee in particular, and that's the end of him. But what a great servant to Doctor Who and to British television in general. Much loved and used by directors because he was very professional. And, again, he had kind of recognisable face, but that didn't... And I love that you can sort of spot Pat Gorman in all sorts of 70s and 80s British television and 60s British television. A legend who is, I find his presence very comforting. When I was getting divorced and I moved out to live with my friend Peter, Pat Gorman lived only about 3 streets away, but I've since discovered he wasn't wild about being interviewed. So although he's happy to send back signed pictures to people and things like that, but he didn't. I never got the chance to meet him and chat to him, which is a shame. It's nice to see, isn't it, Terry Malloy in this? I think he's great in this, and I think it's a very decent thing to do, to go, you've done a good job as Davros, you're hidden behind a mask, you're a good actor, let's give you a chance to do something in Vision. And I remember really liking his character in this. I think it's because he wins me over with the way he says "you're bonkers" in this scene, and so I remember being really upset when I spent the whole of the following week after the cliffhanger hoping that he hadn't actually been killed, but also kind of hoping he had, because I knew that the Cybermen killing somebody with one blow to the back of the head was one of the things that they did in the books, and that was a show of how strong they were, even though they did it with a karate chop in the books rather than a fist as it is here. But so I was sort of torn, is that I didn't want him to be stunned because I wanted the Cybermen to be those strong, indomitable creatures, but also I really liked his character. These two are funny, aren't they? Michael Atwell is one of those really dirty actors. My friend Andy Linden, who's a Cockney character actor, quite a short, Toby Juggy sort of character actor, he likes his dirty actors, does Andy, and he likes all the sort of the L.Q. Joneses and the and the actors used by Peckinpah, the dirty cowboy actors. But there's also a certain breed of sort of Cockney character actors who are also a bit dirty, And you said you came from Fulham. I love that line. That is beautiful. I love Brian Glover. So we'll come back to Atwell and his dirty acting a bit later. I know Brian Glover initially did that as Cockney, and I've seen Glover do Cockney in other things, and it's not good. And I love Brian Glover, national treasure. I think it was right that he decided to default back to his. The reason you employ Brian Glover actually is because of that wonderful voice. So, but I know that John Nathan Turner was particularly pleased with Michael Atwell, who'd been a Bill Sykes, hadn't he, in the BBC classic Oliver Twist. He was a very well-known actor, a very well-known face. He's also a cartoonist for the News of the World. But he was, he cropped up in all sorts of things in movies and on television, playing hard men. So it seemed like he was adding a touch of the grown-up to Doctor Who. But he doesn't hold back in this. And as I say, Nathan Turner, I know, was particularly pleased with him. But I occasionally think he could quite less furious at some points. And he'd also been in the Ice Warriors Atwell as well, which had surprised me, because he's Isper in the Ice Warriors. But by this point, he was a really well-known actor, Michael Atwell. He's a funny one, this one, isn't he? John Ainley, I have found this. If I think Brian Orrell's diction is slightly odd, John Ainley's as the other Cyberman, the Controller's cyber chum, and the one that walks behind them here at this point, you can quite see where he's going. It's almost like he's feeling his way through. There's some strange cyber bits if you keep an eye on what's going on here. But the delight, the thrill of seeing Michael Kilgariff's name on the credits, that's what it was like for me being a fan at that time. Anything I remember seeing that it was the same guy that had played the Cyber Controller, and I knew he'd been in other Doctor Who's, Frontier in Space and Robot. It's an actor from the old days of Doctor Who, is automatically classier than anything we get now, because one is so self-loathing about the present that one invokes the past, which people do in many, many other areas, and I am so guilty of it. You're bonkers. I love the way he says you're bonkers. I love the way Colin rejoinder is. That's debatable. It's a very deadpan, lovely piece of timing. I'd have liked to have seen more of Russell robbing a diamonds merchant. The sort of sardonic humour that Saywood brings is actually rather good in places, even though there is that running. There is it is possible to do a sort of jokey observation about how sometimes it's a little bit too hard nosed to the point that it's comical. But I don't mind the ambition of going, let's kind of toughen up the show. Philip Hinchcliffe's show is quite tough, and I love the Hinchcliffe-Holmes era. I think Holmes perhaps balances the sardonic humour with the grittiness and the toughness slightly better. I think it's all synthesized together slightly. Tom Baker's in a long coat and colourful scarf and a hat, but it's not quite as much of it's not quite as stark a standout as Colin Baker's costume. So it all melds together slightly better. The violence in the Hinchcliffe era is violent, but it doesn't go too far in the way that this season occasionally just goes a little bit too far. I'm sure I've used the example when my English teacher said we could put swear words in our stories if we wanted to, and so the first one I wrote was full of them, and he said, look, because I've allowed you to, you've done it too much and it's lost its impact. And I think the desire to sort of toughen up Doctor Who and make it a bit more muscular as a lure away from the A-Team, and as a riposte to the idea that Doctor Who is sort of cheap and slightly tatty and slightly glitzy and light-end, to make it a bit more good. I think that's a reasonable decision to make as script editor and storyteller, especially as Earthshock and Resurrection and Caves, which are the stories that do that sort of stuff well, had been the most successful ones. So I can see why they made that decision. I think oddly, it's the character, it's the way that the Doctor is portrayed that again makes its tastelessness seems somewhat misplaced when you've got a sort of, when your lead character is dressed in that way, and sometimes when your production design looks a bit more like, the blankety blank than Blade Runner, and that's a dissonance between, the way that television is made here and what they're trying to rise up against or play against or contrast to, and the resources that they have available. So. But then you have this, as I say, you've got a sort of crew-cutted Michael Atwell here, being all furious and being, is this where he does the, like you, this planet really depresses me. And his jaw is always slightly jutting, and his mouth's just always slightly ajar and sort of, cussed and, But then you've got Jonathan David, who's one of those, another of those actors that we've never really found. He's in an episode of The Professionals that I remember quite well, called Heroes, where he's one of the bad guys in it. But I say now, obviously he's doing this slightly jokingly. It's beautifully shot, all this stuff in the quarry, the head over there. Matthew Robinson really knows how to place his cameras here in the quarry. I love all of this stuff. And I love this cyber theme. So all of this stuff is really great. It's meat and drink. And yeah, whacking a Cyberman's head off, that's really containable violence because it's easily done. It's a great. Oh, they whack his hand off here, but there's quite a few. There's a lot of Cybermen do get pummeled quite a lot, which is. I get that, and that's great. That POV of the camera charging down. Again, the fact that the Cybermen are slightly vulnerable. In a way that they didn't used to be, is a compromise. But it was sort of acceptable with the Raston robot because he's the most efficient killing machine ever, and the fact that he could be chopping heads off and smashing Cybermen to bits was one thing. And I suppose these guys are augmented, so they're slightly stronger than people would be. But I do feel the Cybermen's invincibility takes a bit of a knocking. But Jonathan Davis casting I find really odd. I know he was promoted from Cyber Lieutenant, wasn't he? Because another actor was playing this Stratton and broke his arm. But it's always said, the actor Trevor Raymond. I've tried to find an actor called Trevor Raymond and never had. So that's another area that needs a bit of looking into. I'm not putting that thing on. So you've got Michael Atwell there being, plausible West End, East End, heavy. Well, there's a Freudian slip, and I'm talking about the actor Jim Freud. It's East End, genuine East End filmic villain being I'm lending a bit of gritty credibility to Doctor Who. And then you got Jonathan David, who's a bit like a number of waiters I've worked with, going, I do not want to dress as a Cyberman. Thank you very much. And it is quite an odd contrast. And he doesn't do anything wrong, but it's a piece of casting that slightly jars for me, if I'm perfectly honest. And it's through no fault of his. That's quite a nice close-up of the other Stephen there, Stephen Whale. Because they are getting cybernized. That's very sad. I love all this dark stuff in the sewers. This is all beautifully atmospheric, and the nice echo that they've got as well going on there. Credit to Nicola Bryant as well. She does such a good job as Perry. I always feel knowing. Seeing those brilliant performances that she and Peter Davison give in Caves of Androzani, I feel a bit sad that they quite often fall into that tone of sort of bickering / moaning for Perry when she's so much more interesting than that. And I think that's where Saywood does go wrong, where he mistakes sort of tedious bickering for drama or even wit or humour. I think there's a misstep there often with the interaction between the leads, which is no fault of the actors. I remember being told when I was younger that Griffiths was supposed to die at that point. I don't know if that was somebody reading Griffiths was supposed to die a bit earlier, and a friend of mine going, it was probably then. But I love the strength of the Cybermen. I love the bit where David Banks puts his two fingers on Maurice Colburn's shoulder and he sort of winces, and then that bit there with Brian Glover, who is, I think, the best thing about this story. I will be choosing him as one of those. But one of the castings they thought of for that's a great shot. He puts his camera in some good places, Matthew Robinson. Was Donald Pleasance they sounded out to play Griffiths, who you can see he would be much more of a sort of snivelling, fussy sort of characterization. But Pleasance would have been brilliant. But I adore the fact that Brian Glover has been in Doctor Who, and I think again it grounds the fantastical and gives it a plausibility and a realism. But in contrast to what James Beckett and Michael Atwill bring, there's also something utterly charming and quirky and delightful, and it's part of it's the Yorkshire accent, and it's amazing how few northern accents there are in the whole of classic Doctor Who, because so much television at that time, everybody was, RP unless, there was a specific reason not to be, which is a, really fascinating aspect of the television landscape at that time that seems so bizarre now, and yet informs so much of what we watch. So Terry Malloy here is feeling like, a sort of third companion. He's had a bit of banter. He's been terribly brave. That's a really good stunt, actually, that exploding head. He gets the gun, and he has a sort of comedy I've shot the Doctor's spaceship thing there. So Terry Malloy feels like he's on course to be, our chummy companion, but actually is not much use to the story anymore, and they don't want to pay him for episode 2. So and then we get there was me going, oh, is he dead or not? And this is the sort of Bohemian Rhapsody. No. I'm sure somebody must have done that as a video. The no, because the amount of times that they say no. But that to me was a thrilling opening episode. I remember where I was when I watched it. We had a telly in my mum's bedroom. It was before my mum's, so I went to watch it in. There. I don't know why I watched it on that one. So would that have been? I think I would have still watched this in black and white. Do you know? I think I still would have watched this in black and white. That's how. I don't think we got a colour telly till the Two Doctors. Isn't that a thing, eh? That seems now like I'm talking about, reading it on papyrus and having all the imagery drawn from me on a quill. But yes, I must have watched this in black and white, and yet I don't think about that. I've had to remind myself of that because it's to me very much in colour. And I watched Davison's last series at somebody else's house, so I definitely, I did watch those in colour, but I don't think we got a black and white, we got a colour TV till the Two Doctors. I'm pretty certain. Which is a bit frightening. I can't remember though. But I can remember which room that I was in. And maybe we weren't watching it on the portable telly. Anyway, it doesn't matter. That's only important to me. But put it like this: I watched it a very long time ago, and I'm ancient, and times have changed now, and we can do things at the touch of a button, and aren't we lucky? And in those days, it was all orange squash and analog conversation. So listen, I really enjoy that first episode. I mean, I suppose the issues I have with it is that I think Colin Baker's costume, which I think as a piece of design is good, I just think it slightly doesn't quite meld with everything else around it, and that can be helpful as the Doctor, but it's almost like it's too big for the screen in the sense that, sets in those days are rendered largely on one level with 3 flats, and it's multi-camera, and it's a little light end, isn't it? That's whilst trying to be Blade Runner / Alien / which is what Saywood wants to do with the violence and the gore. But as I say, I have to be honest. As a kid, I wanted the violence. I wanted the toughness. I wanted the grimness. That made me feel like my program that was often dismissed as kid stuff could actually compete with grown-up stuff and therefore earn its rightful place, in the nation's hearts and affections. But this is, of course, where did the viewers drop off massively between episodes 1 and 2, and I think that's there's maybe one too many invocation of past glories. And I started talking about Kilgarriff, didn't I? The idea that you chase to get the actor that had played the part 20 years ago, even though you can't see his face, even though 20 years ago or whatever it was, he didn't say the lines, and now he's got a massive tum. It seems an odd way to bend over backwards in order to cast the same person. But anyway, I'm still glad he's there because I like Michael Kilgarriff, and I like an awareness and a deference to the past. I think it behoves us to pay tribute to what has gone before and realise that we aren't where we are without the skill and hard work and creativity of other people. And I think the entertainment industry is particularly bad at remembering that, and actually can often scoff at the people that went before it. So at least for all his faults, John Nathan Turner did have a respect for what had gone before in a way that doesn't always happen in this business, a business that forgets people very quickly or dispenses with them. Sometimes it's more active than that. Anyway, listen, what are my favourite? I've got to choose two favourite things. I thought it was. Is it two? Well, it is. Well, that's what Robin said he's going to do. I can't remember my own rules. I suppose that makes sense because if it was 225s, there'd be one thing for each. So, well, my two things are. I'm going to have an argument with myself because I've got to choose Brian Glover because I think he's going to be chosen at some point, and actually he gets less to do in episode 2. You said you came from Fulham, and he's got a brilliant line next week where he says time travel in an organ. I love that. So I have to choose Glover because I think actually across the whole story he's the best thing in it. So then my second thing, do I choose the black camouflage Cyberman, which I rather like? That could be my bonus thing later because I do really think it works, and it's one of those in Doctor Who always, the simplest ideas are sometimes the best, or a slight twist on something that's just taken a little bit of thought outside the box that you go, oh, that makes perfect sense, and it's really effective. And I love all that darkness in the sewers. I was too busy moaning about the fact that the Cybermen are amicable to bullets, that actually that scene with the music and the advancing Cyberman and Griffith shooting and Lytton turning the gun on him, and then the door opening and the two Cybermen coming through and the light streaming through that. I think that's a brilliantly directed sequence and really, textbook classic, wonderful Doctor Who stuff. It's got all the ingredients you want there, apart from the fact that I was too busy being distracted by the fact that Cybermen shouldn't be damaged by bullets. That Cybermen can't be damaged by anything except gold and radiation and a weather machine, and apart from that, what else have the Cyber Romans done for us? But I think the other thing that I like is what I call that gritty Euston Films stuff. The fact that all the stuff with Lytton and his mob, and everything from Terry Malloy's finger in the ear, which I just love. I think that's just a lovely little touch. And I think in the book is the telephone handle greasy as well. I don't think I've made that up. Is that he speaks to the telephone and he has to wipe it, or it's a bit manky anyway, which is a nice little realistic visceral touch that again is to Saywood's credit to balance out all of those well-rehearsed arguments we have against his take on the show that I understand, and I'm sympathetic to those criticisms. But not only that. And also, it's very interesting because Maurice Colborne at the time looked brilliant in that suit. That looked really high end, but it does look a little bit 80s now, and you can sort of feel the acrylic of the shirt and that slightly light grey. That the way that suit is cut and fits is slightly. It looked amazing at the time, and now it looks just slightly dated in its cut and its shape and its colour. But I love that mob of characters. I love the interaction that they have. And as I say, there's something about the hue and grain of the film that gives it a certain authenticity or reminiscence of, stuff like Minder and The Professionals and those things that were shot on films that grown-ups watched that seemed to have a sort of atmosphere and feel and sheen about them that was just slightly grittier, slightly more urban, slightly more eavesdropped upon almost in a way, although actually some of that filming is actually, very filmic and almost cinematic in a way, or certainly large television. But that also ties in with that filming on Telos and the way that the camera is placed and the smoke and all the stuff in that quarry pit that is made to seem like a sort of industrial, cold planet. that again feels like a sort of authentic. You can feel the coldness in the air. You can hear the metal clang, and again that's something. You can see the breath in the air, and that's something to do with again the authenticity of the filming. So it's that feel, it's that film, it's that, and Michael Atwill helps with that as an actor in those scenes as well. But and even Pat Gorman, because he's got the face that fits those sorts of things in the same way that James Beckett does. So that sort of what I call that Euston-y, gritty, grimy feel. So it's not just urban because it works in the quarry pit as well. But I think you know what I mean. That and Brian Glover, they're my two things about episode 1 of Attack of the Cybermen. However, Robin Bunce, son of Roger Bunce, a high-achieving individual in his own right and a very, very nice man, but also he has a connection because he is the son of the much-missed and utterly lovely Roger Bunce, who was a cameraman on many Doctor Who's, but not including Attack of the Cybermen. But what has Robin chosen for episode 1?
Well, there's so much to like about that episode. Before I get on to my picks, just a bit of background information. This was the first Doctor Who that I ever committed to the medium of VHS. So we bought a video player, I don't know, a year or so before this to watch, to record Box of Delights. So this was the first time I committed Doctor Who to VHS, and I watched that tape over and over again. In fact, I recorded the whole of Colin Baker's first season and got to know it really, really well. As I say, even to this day, I still love that season. Anyway, turning to this episode, what are the two things that I'm going to choose of this smorgasbord of wonder that we've just experienced? Well, first of all, I'm going to say that what I love about this episode is the recreation of 1985. The BBC, the script writers have done such a good job, Paul and Moore I should say of course, has done such a good job creating a plausible 1985. I'm thinking about Lytton's suit. I'm thinking about the joke about council workers leaning on their shovels, which is kind of pitch perfect Dame Shirley Porter 1985. I love the location work. I love the way that Lytton's car pulls up outside this incredible office block in Hammersmith. It's a great example of 80s modernism. Sadly, it was pulled down a few years ago. I went and had a quick look at Hammersmith. I went and had a quick look at the area where this was shot in preparation for this video. And what I noticed is that the location scouts chose the most 80s view in that whole vicinity. There's kind of 70s brutalist office blocks in the background. There's a whole bunch of Victorian stuff just around the corner. But the location scouts obviously zeroed in on this kind of high 80s modernist incredible building. So I think what they're doing in creating this incredible feel of the 1980s, this wonderful distillation of 1985. I think what they're doing is they're doing that thing that H.G. Wells does, which H.G. Wells calls the domestication of the impossible. That is to say, they are creating a plausible right now, and then dropping something alien and something fantastic into it. And in so doing, by creating such a plausible real world, it makes the alien invasion, or it makes this science fiction element all the more plausible. So as I say, that's my first pick. I love the way they've recreated 1985. My second pick from this episode would have to be Nicola Bryant and her portrayal of Perry. Nicola Bryant, I think, is one of the real gems of this era of Doctor Who, and together with Ace, I think, these are the two companions that really stood out to me from 80s Who. What do I like about Nicola Bryant's performance in this case? Well, first of all, I love the way that she consistently laughs at the Doctor's foibles. It's often said that Peter Davison is a real human Doctor. I think Colin Baker's a really human Doctor as well, but he's human in a different way. He's human in the sense that he has these foibles, and he has a slightly overinflated sense of his own importance. And Nicola Bryant, the way she reacts off him, brings that out beautifully. I also love the way that Nicola Bryant holds a gun. Okay, so she holds a gun a couple of times in this episode, and both times you can see a kind of moral struggle in her performance. Particularly when Colin Baker is popping up out of that hole in the ground wearing the police officer's hat. you can see the kind of moral confusion, the resolution tempered with the knowledge that she's about to, use lethal force. So I think Nicola Bryant is just fantastic. She makes all of the action plausible. She makes the Doctor more plausible because of her performance. So those are my picks, 1985 and Nicola Bryant. Those are my two picks from episode 1. I'll let you enjoy episode 2 and I'll run you through my picks from episode 2 in, 45, 50 minutes, whatever, something like that. Enjoy.
Thanks, Robin. And as he alludes, when I approached everybody to do this, these were, planned as podcasts and videos. I will, I'm sure, one day put the videos together, but the podcasts will certainly be out a lot earlier than that. So with apologies to all of my guests who went to trouble to film themselves in excellent quality with fantastic backdrops and, really pay attention to that. And for most consumers, it's in podcast form. But you live and learn. I went into these podcasts utterly clueless as to what I was doing. I did get an early spurt of, lots of people tuning into the YouTube versions, but these podcasts are much easier to send out and are much easier to consume as well. So I have to concentrate my resources on those because I also have to earn a living and do the job that I do that actually pays me money. So anyway, that's apropos of nothing, but it's an acknowledgement that Robin went to trouble there to film himself rather wonderfully, and you're currently just getting his disembodied voice. Do I get a little smidgen of a point for his what he calls the recreation of 1985? I think we were alluding to some of the same things there about the feel and the grittiness. And yes, he described it much better than I because he's an historian and a scholar and an intellectual and all of those things, whereas I'm a lovey with an iPhone with a good memory for character actors' names. But and yes, that pulling up of the car outside the building is a fantastic establishing shot of telling you everything that these guys are about and what sort of genre they're in, and and as he says, bringing that sort of genre that we associate with modern British crime drama. Grounds the science fiction. It's what I've alluded to often in this podcast about the John Pertwee thing of the Yeti on your loo in Tooting Bec. The idea that if the background and the setting and all of the window dressing is very real and plausible, the juxtaposition between that and the fantastical is all the more stark and all the more interesting and all the more a perversion of what we know, which and there's nothing more frightening than a version of what we know that's slightly skewed or has an oddness imposed upon it or has an interloper come into it to upset it. That I think, or it tends to speak better to us than a load of people in different hats from another planet and funny salutes, getting invaded by a monster where it's not that it's never quite as effective, which is why Doctor Who keeps coming back to Earth, because it's the perversion of the recognizable, and that's Doctor Who at its best, when it takes what we know and pulls the rug from under it, or is a slightly different take on it, or perverts it. And so yes, that looks like a sort of a heist in an episode of The Professionals, into which indestructible, but not as indestructible as they should be, alien robot guys come in and kidnap the bank robbers, as it were. So it's up to you whether I get a point for that. I didn't choose Nicola Bryant. Again, because I take the regulars for granted. I love Perry. I love Nicola Bryant. I do think she could have been better served in her time in the series, and I actually think she's better served at the beginning of her run and at the end of her run than she is in this season. But that's none of that is a reflection on her. And I think Robin's quite right to highlight the gun. I remember Tom Baker highlighting how Louise Jameson holds the spade in Horror of Fang Rock when she's feeding the furnace or whatever it is in that. And he's saying, she's a bold actress there because she's doing it as an alien who doesn't quite know what a spade is, whereas a lesser actress would try to look a bit cooler about it, as it were. And I think Nicola Bryant does the same thing there, is that she and as Robin points out about the way that she holds the gun, there's a temptation when you're an actor playing cops and robbers and soldiers and all that sort of thing to go, I've got this, I like this because I'm an actor, sort of showing off. Whereas Nicola Bryant's going, I'm Perry, the botany student, and I don't really like holding a gun, but I know I've kind of got to. So instead of the vanity of the actor going, I could look pretty cool with this, holding this gun, she's very true to the character. And it speaks about her awkwardness, and it helps with the uncertainty of the drama, because there's a fragility to what she's doing, because she's not totally in control of holding a gun, because she's not kind of used to it. That's a really good thing for Robin to highlight, and I absolutely endorse that choice. But I didn't make it because I chose Brian Glover, which he might choose next time, and if he does, I get the point for that because I've already chosen him. I mean, it's a loaded weapon, that, because it means that one of the other things I choose, he obviously won't choose because he's chosen Brian Glover. So it doesn't really help me in the long term. But nonetheless, there's no way I wasn't going to choose Brian Glover, and I wasn't going to be caught out by not choosing him for episode 1 and having Robin choose him and then me not be able to choose him, because, as I say, I think he is my definite highlight. It's bizarre, I haven't really even talked about Maurice Colborne, who I think is fantastic and was very popular in our house because he'd been very memorable in Day of the Triffids. But anyway, listen up. I've got another episode to talk through. So why am I gassing on here when I might have little lulls or longueurs that I need to fill with whatever it is this stuff is that comes out of my mouth. Anyway, I'm grateful to you for listening. It's nice to be doing a Colin Baker. There aren't that many to do, and they haven't been hugely chosen. And in fact, I think this is the only one I've got somebody who sent me this, because a lot of people have chosen stories and haven't yet got round to sending me their contributions. So I've had to pretty much wait until I got this to do my next Colin. So I've done Time Lash from Emma Reeves, I've done The Two Doctors from Matt Hayden, and now I am doing Attack of the Cybermen. And I seem to in my mind's eye, part 2 of Attack is a very different beast from part 1, and in fact is it doesn't have much of what my favourite stuff about that first episode is, which is that, industrial London, urban, gritty thing that I chose, that I've just talked about at length, and instead has it's got the Cryons and that cyber tomb set that they wander around. So it's a different beast. Let's see if it's a beast that I can tame. But that's next time. So with gratitude to Robin, who, when I asked him to do this, said yes, 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 and not, as we know, all great episodes end, not by saying no, 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 no. It's not Bohemian Rhapsody, it's that other song. No, 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 no. No limits. There's no limits to how I can think I've come to a great way to end the podcast and then say something else, which I've just done now twice. Well, hello everybody. That was Robin Bunce, who you heard talking there, who is a Cambridge academic, who has written many scholarly works about all sorts of things, but including Doctor Who and TV sci-fi, and recently organised some celebratory scholasticism about Nigel Neal's 1984 that was recently released by the BFI on Blu-ray. So he's always got his eye on opportunities to promote and discuss classic television. Doctor Who, no less, but also his father, the late Roger Bunce, who only died about a year ago. Was a cameraman at the BBC who worked on adventures with almost all of the classic Doctors and retained an interest in the show, popped up on a few commentaries and extras late in the range. I think we perhaps could have made use of him earlier. He also did a 2-part Who's Round. He was really great, was Roger, was really enthusiastic, had a good memory, and was very happy to engage with our aficionados of the old stuff, and was a great fighter for the legacy of Television Centre. Well, and indeed had some things to say about it selling off. Great guy was Roger. So I'm happy that through being in touch with Robin, I still have some connection to Roger because we used to email back and forth. He was always happy to answer questions or just to keep in touch. He turned up to see my show. He turned up when Web of Fear was shown at the cinema in Leicester Square. Yeah, he was just a great guy, was Roger. So, with a nod and a wink to Rog, let's see what Robin's going to like about Attack of the Cybermen Part 2. Once I have hopefully said interesting things during it, and there's no better way to do that than to watch from the beginning, as it says here on BritBox, the 44 minutes that constitute Episode 2 of Attack of the Cybermen in 3, 2, 1. I'm going to watch from the beginning. That's what it says. Here we go. That's quite loud, isn't it? So block your Alexa. Alexa, volume 3. So I hope your Alexa didn't respond to my Alexa voice. Maybe she's only got ears for me. Anyway, here we are. Doctor Who, in capitals, Attack of the Cybermen. By Paula Moore, who we suspect was Eric Saywood. Interesting that Part 2 is not all in big capitals, but Attack of the Cybermen is. So here we are. So this is we get a bit of Terry Malloy, even though he's strictly speaking dead by the time the episode proper starts. Again, there's lots of Cybermen become a bit sort of cannon foddery here, although I suppose, I mean, they get smashed to bits in the invasion, don't they? But I think it takes a bit more doing. I always like the idea that yes, they can be killed by their own weapons. Although actually, that is a bit of a design flaw. Carry with you the one thing that can destroy you. But as I say, maybe the idea that the Cybermen are invincible was very much played up by the Target books, and so they for fans of my age, they had with them a certain mythology before any of us first saw them. I'm sure when I watch Earthshock, that has been chosen by a big Finnish mover and shaker, but he's not actually sent me his thing. So anyway, the Cybermen were always my sort of favourite monster, but again, I think that's partially because part of me likes not liking the thing that everybody else likes as much, and because it was very easy to take the Daleks for granted, I suppose. Although I always did quite get excited when they were. It's how they were sort of rationed actually during my formative years during the show. If you think about it, if I started watching with The Invisible Enemy, repeat. So I suppose my first season proper was probably The Key to Time, although my first memories of a consistent series are season 17. So I suppose I started with Daleks. But then the Daleks don't really appear again until Resurrection. The Cybermen didn't have season 17, season 18, and that's a long time when you're a kid, 2.5 years, especially as I'd already got memories from previous couple of years. So we're talking sort of 4 years really till Earthshock, by which time I've got the Doctor Who monster book and various novels and stuff. So the Cybermen were always quite exciting for me, and I think these 80s Cybermen are very good. I think they deserve a lot of credit for those pilot suits that they augment with those pipes and sprayed silver, and the gloves at this stage I think are very good. The comedy, this is where Malcolm Clark's score, which has much to recommend it. I love the Cyber March. I love those clanging bells that suggest sort of chilly metal, echoing around cold, dark, shadowy catacombs or ship's holds or whatever. But we've got the Steptoe and Son sort of riff, haven't we? And then we have the funny, or Stratton's a bit sad he's having to be a Cyberman, and it's tonally a bit all over the place. And I always think if the music is having a laugh as well, I always think, well, that might be fun for you to do, but I I'm not sure what I think of that. And yet, what Malcolm Clarke did elsewhere, certainly with Cybermen, and that score for Earthshock is amazing. And this has echoes of that. Time travel in an organ. Has he got an earring as well there, Glover? I love the way the Cyberman walks. You look at the way he walks. He's like, I am walking like a jaunty Cyberman. Now, John Ainley is the name of the Cyberman that chats to Michael Kilgarriff. There's very much sort of two double acts. There's the cyber controller and jaunty John Ainley, and then there's the cyber leader David Banks with Brian Orrell as the lieutenant. But he is a relation, I believe, of Anthony Ainley. I'm sure there was a mention there. I'm sorry if I'm drinking a bit. I'm watching on the... you might snap your hand off this. This is very much... He likes it in the dialogue as well, doesn't he? The fact that things are a bit visceral and violent does Mr. Saywood, whose hands you can see all over this. Maurice Colburn carries off a jumpsuit very well. I think these two guys look great. I think Maurice Colburn didn't really mention last time. Odd that, because his return was great news. He'd made such an impression in Resurrection of the Daleks, but we already liked him because he'd been Jack Coker in the Household Hadoke. He'd been Jack Coker in Day of the Triffids, which was... it was a BBC science fiction that was a bit grown up. It was not like Doctor Who. It was one that you had to stay up a bit later to see, and it was altogether deemed a bit more serious. And the heroes are nice, but the lady's posh and the bloke's lovely, John Deteen, and Maurice Colburn was there to give it a bit of grit. He was the one that I think shouted at the government and to handcuff people to blind people in order that people. No, he didn't do that. But anyway, he was there. He was there very much as the sort of hard-bitten, tough guy, uncompromising, pragmatic kind of hero. Not necessarily the one that you liked, but the one you admired because he was a bit tough as old boots. And so having him in Doctor Who was quite cool. Then the idea that he would come back was very exciting. Odd though to then take everything that we kind of liked about him in Resurrection, that he was this, cold-blooded killer, frankly. And I don't think I'm ever quite, that the whole thrust of this episode, leads to the punchline. I don't think I've ever misjudged anybody so much as I did. The man who led the massacre of... The first thing we ever saw him do was to massacre some escaping prisoners, who then... the reason he escapes at the end of Resurrection is that he kills one of his own men in order to leave no trace. He's not that nice. He may be working for the Cryons in this, but I don't think they ever quite rationalise that with his brilliant villainy that he does in Resurrection of the Daleks, and what Maurice Colburn does very well. Although, of course, his final role was as lovely Tom Howard in Howard's Way, who was an altogether more benign and sort of series lead type, and it was the part that he was playing when he died. I think and I remember reading in the paper when he died, very, very young, just as he was, he'd finally sort of got a lead in this. No, he died because he's in Gangsters, of course, in which he's excellent. If you've ever seen Gangsters, there's an eccentric series, but I very much recommend you give it a bash. That's some nice direction with the Cyberman standing outside when the cyber lieutenant comes in. It's just a nice bit of positioning.
You will go to the console room. I talk slightly like I've got a nasal issue.
Whereas Mark Hardy is much more like that. Yeah, anyway, I've got to stop being hard on Brian Orrell for not being Mark Hardy. I sound like I've got a Mark Hardy crush, but I do like Mark Hardy's Cyber Lieutenant. This is nice. This is quite a shocking scene, I think, and I love the Cybermen with that's beautifully shot, that real close-up of the profile of the Cyberman. But yeah, the cobwebby Cyberman going through the catacombs, I think is really nice. you know, and as a young fan, the idea that we would be revisiting the tombs of the Cybermen, especially as Tomb of the Cybermen was missing, and I don't think I'd seen a picture of the Cyber Controller at that point. I think it took a while before. I know there are pictures of the Cyber Controller in 2, but I don't think there were any that I had seen. I don't think until after. So the Cyber Controller being a domed thing without handlebars was a bit of a surprise to me. And you know, it's nice to have, just as it's nice to have a Dalek with different things on its sucker arm, it's nice to have a Cyberman with a slight difference of design. And I think all of these pipes, you know, coming off them are great. They've got a real industrial thing. Although they have now, you cannot now see the moving jaw, which I do think is because you can't quite make out what it is, and because it's a hint of something organic, I do rather like. I mean, even Stratton's mouth is even sort of slightly loose, isn't it? So he's got the. I mean, it's quite cleverly done in that, you know, these guys who are, you know, they're rejects, aren't they? Essentially, you know, they are half Cyberman anyway. So, you know, the design syncs up, as it were. Finally, they've allowed Perry to wear some stuff because she's going into the Coldy tombs. Because, yeah, I think in her last costume you'd have noticed when she got cold. I can't believe it. So, and I suppose that, but there's part of me going, well, if you are going to do the tombs of the Cybermen, should it not look like the tombs of the Cybermen? But I suppose actually they don't look, you know, it's you know, its doors, its entranceway is in a sort of vertical set with railings. It's not as actually as I think it's actually a reasonable update. I think you could go, well, you know, this is in the same universe as the previous tombs, but obviously made in an 80s telly way. I don't think you don't reproduce exactly what you saw in the 60s, do you? In the same way that you don't make the Cybermen look the same as they looked last time. David Banks's body language is so good. You can. And I quite like the idea that the Cybermen are slightly, we shouldn't really be here. That adds to a nice sort of a nice creepiness. Michael Kilgariff is a very interesting guy. He's he's a sort of after dinner speaker. He's a great fan of vaudeville theatre. You know, and so the idea that he didn't do the voice in the original when actually he's done a lot of radio. You know, he is a sort of voice man, if you like. So it's nice for him that he gets to do the controller this time. Yeah. So Maurice Colburn. You know, just doing Howard's Way. And then dying halfway through, and they had to sort of carry on the series and rewrite it on the fly, I think, because he was making the show when he died very suddenly. That's brilliant. I love that bit because it's such a shock. And you know, I'm a sucker for a Cyberman getting his head knocked off. And yeah, this fight is quite fun. That David Banks does a little sort of punch to the stomach before dispatching that. The cobwebby Cyberman. It's quite fun, and I quite like that they don't have manhandle the Doctor, and Colin Baker really goes for it, sort of, you know, suggesting the strength of the thing that's hurling him about. Now, I'd seen the Cryons because the week before I'd watched Saturday Superstore, which I didn't always watch. I wonder if I'd watched it deliberately though, because I knew Doctor Who was coming up, and they actually showed the scene of Varn, played by Sarah Green, getting shot, and then they sort of cut back to her and she said, "Will Varn survive?" And you're going, well, it didn't look like it. She's been shot by a Cyberman, you know. And she said, "Who is played by me?" And it's like, oh, Sarah Green is in Doctor Who, and there's some quite heavyweight casting among the Cryon contingent. Not that you would have a clue, because you can't see who any of them are. They're curious costumes. Now, this is Threst is Esther Freud, the novelist, who married David Morrissey from The Next Doctor, and is from the Freud clan. The famous family. Is she Clement Freud's daughter? I don't know how they're all. And there's Emma Freud as well, isn't there? Who's married to Richard Curtis. And so they're all. Now there's sisters going on, cousins maybe, but they're all from the same bunch. So there's lots of connections to Doctor Who and to other illustrious areas of UK culture. And she was an actress, I think, only for a short while, Esther Freud, and then became a novelist and an extremely successful one. So an interesting figure who I'd sort of love to interview, really, because I like anyone who's led an interesting and artistic life that also at one point played a Doctor Who monster with a see-through head and a moustache made out of bubble wrap or whatever. And, some effort has been made with the Cryons. I don't think they're 100% successful. They do look like they've got dinner plates on their necks. Well, not dinner plates, kind of things that you'd serve canapes on. Frosted glass kind of servers. I think the moustache stuff is quite good because it breaks up the traditional idea of sort of femininity in monsters that are all played by women and have these funny sort of dancey movements. So I quite like that. I think that's quite a daring and not particularly cliched way of approaching an all-female race. Go give them sort of walrusy moustaches things, and the trick with the eyes is quite fun. That they have that, obviously that magnification going on, and so that the human eye is magnified, so it looks bigger within the thing, but you can sort of see that it's magnified rather than an actual eye. So what's going on there? But I don't mind that. It's playing with form, it's playing with shape. And here's Faith Brown, who's got a bit of added colour and massive breasts. And now I'm not saying that because I'm a starer at breasts or core look at the bazoomas on that type of fellow, but I think with Faith Brown, I think it would be dishonest of one not to notice that she's packing quite a lot of heat in the mammary department. And Faith Brown, really curiously, was an impressionist, very well-known TV face at the time, but for light ent and for comedy, and I think is really good in this. And gives a good acting performance. So a sign that, don't underestimate somebody's acting because we associate them with something else like vaudeville or stand-up or song and dance or whatever. Because I think she's excellent in this. And you would think she was one of those people, because she was in I like this scene with Perry and the Cryons because I like the levels that they have to the design. I think it's quite strikingly staged in that way. That opening shot where you've got somebody up quite high up and she's right at the bottom. I think it's nicely framed. It's a curious change in tone this episode because obviously we lose a lot of the location and characters we had in episode 1 and are introduced to a whole new bunch for episode 2. So it is very much a game of two halves. I quite like the movement that the Cryons do. So you've got Sarah Green, who was supposed to be Koo Stark. Now, Koo Stark was a bit of a joke in our house because she was the sort of person that my brothers knew about because she was an actress, but she was also dating Prince Andrew, which in those days didn't quite carry with it the burden of public opinion that it might now. It was just that Prince Andrew was seeing this actress who got her kit off in a couple of things. So in a way, she was supposed to be the one that was harming his reputation. Oh, how times have changed. And in fact, because as she proved in a couple of films, she was all grown up. Now he would probably use her to improve his reputation. But Faith Brown, I know some people who've, who go to great efforts to sort of track performers down and things. Faith Brown is not as easy to find as you would think, seeing as I say, she did an I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here, a while ago now, but that's still, more recent and more of a sort of everybody's seen phenomenon than a lot of people that we consider famous from Doctor Who because, they might have starred in the second series of a drama that was on in 1994 or whatever. And I was really surprised when my friend Ben said, "Well, actually, we never hear, we don't know where Faith Brown's old agent doesn't know where she is or whatever." So I wonder if she's just gone, "Well, I've had enough now. I've done it. Money, don't need to. I'll just keep my head down." Anyway, I hope she had, because when I heard that she was going to be in it, I was like, "Oh, really? I'm not sure about that," because of the association. She was an impressionist and a sort of buck-toothed, brassy sort of, as I say, Saturday Night Light really type of figure. And I think she does a lovely job here. I mean, some of their body language is slightly exaggerated, but that's what they're going for. These are creatures that move slightly differently. And I always think anything that makes an attempt to not be, just a person plodding about, and to do with aliens something that is suggestive of alienness, of strangeness, of weirdness. And I actually think the colour scheme that she has on her face is quite good as well. So, I'm sympathetic to people who don't think the cryons work, but I think they're a pretty brave attempt to do something a bit different, and a race of female aliens at a time when, the classic series never did brilliantly with sort of female parts. The latter era is better. It does say a lot that you get all these very respected female performers from different fields, because you've got, Sarah Green, household name among kids, but for being a presenter. Faith Brown, comedian. Esther Freud is at that time a young, not very well known. And then Sarah Berger, a very highly thought of classical actress. I know Sarah a bit now. I interviewed her for Who's Round, but then she directed a friend of mine in a play. So we bumped into each other on a few different occasions, and are in touch on social media and stuff. She's always been very game about talking about Doctor Who, even though she's done, she was well known at that time for doing sort of proper classical stuff. I think it's funny. There's a cliche about Doctor Who being in quarries, but that's only because we know that they're quarries. I mean, as a kid, I didn't go to many quarries, so it's not like, oh, this is a thing that's around the corner. I didn't go to any quarries. I don't go to quarries now. I think, a lot of sci-fi we now see set in forests and more or whatever. I actually think a quarry, to be suggestive of a stark and bleak alien planet, provides a lot of visual interest. Yeah, sort of grey and brown or whatever, but the shapes of the mounds and you can sort of feel the gravel and the sand and I remember this from the first time. I remember thinking this was amazing and pretty grim. The Cybermen beneath, and then that show of strength. This is very, Brian Glover really sells it, and it's a simple trick because it's it's shot very close up and stuff. But I think that's really simple and effective and nicely done. And Atwell's great, isn't he? He's the real deal. He's hard as nails. Doesn't let the facade drop for a minute. He was a memorable Bill Sykes, but he was Kenny Beale in EastEnders as well, New Zealand, from the New Zealand side of the family. A few Whoas turned up in EastEnders over the years. I remember when Brian Croucher turned up in it as well. Being very chuffed, always pleased to see Doctor Who actors in work. But Atwell died. Atwell died quite suddenly, I think, and unexpectedly, and was starring in Hotel Babylon, or had just done a couple of semi-regular parts in it. And I remember, I think the week after he died, he featured in an episode, but it was as a kind of flashback. So I wonder if it had been shot with the previous episode, but it wasn't footage from an old episode. But as a result, he wasn't credited, I don't think. So his actual valedictory appearance on television was, and in the old days, using that sort of footage of you, even though you're non-speaking, if you've been hired as an actor, you'd get a credit and, blah-de-blah-de-blah. The lines are a bit more blurred now and people take the piss. But that Michael Atwell's last telly role was a sort of uncredited non-speaking bit just because it had been sort of fed into an episode, probably shot in a previous block. And they're like, can we just use that? And of course, so therefore no acknowledgement or anything like that. that it was showed post-mortem. That still of the Doctor, and that they've seen that the Cryons have just shown to Perry of the Doctor trapped in there with Flast, to give a sense of where he is and what he's doing, is actually a still pressed on pause in horrible 80s videotape way of a scene that hasn't actually happened yet. So they're watching the future there. So yeah, sorry, I've just finished my pint of ice cold water because it's the it's the hottest, one of the hottest weeks on record, and I'm watching everybody getting very chilly on Telos. So there's been quite a lot of chatting so far in this episode, but I suppose you did always feel at this time that Doctor Who was trying to tie in whatever was happening in the world. So Halley's Comet was very big, and it's quite humbling, Halley's Comet, because it only comes every 75 years. He's very bold with his close-ups, and I quite like the fact there's one of those rare character looking straight at the camera from Sarah Berger there, and she's beautiful, and she's even beautiful in her cryon makeup. Lovely eyes. It's a really interesting that somebody's, even under all of that stuff, you can get a sense of somebody's beauty. So what was I talking about? Colin Baker, by the way, he is so much extra value that they're boiling under studio lights here. You totally buy that he is cold. He never stops. I think it's great leading man stuff. He never stops giving a sense of the urgency of the episode, giving the emotion, but also he never lets you forget that this is really, really freezing. It's great at all of that sort of stuff. But yes, Halley's Comet. I remember my science teacher going, and it's every 75 years, so I won't be around next time it comes. And me thinking that was a really brave thing for a grown-up to admit, to their own mortality. Whereas now, I know when you're in your mid-40s, you go, well, yeah, something that's in 75 years, I will be dead, and there's nothing I could do about it. But there's a chance, I suppose, that yes, I might be alive the next time that it comes. But there was certainly this was certainly in the news, Halley's Comet, and it was something that you talked about in schools, and everyone as a nation was quite interested. And I like those things where everyone's sort of talking at the same time about the same thing. And he's very good at being, I like the way he goes, I'm a rather angry one. He's very good at being pissed off with the Time Lords. So there was a sense that, in Doctor Who bringing Halley's Comet into it, it felt like Doctor Who was being part of the national conversation, and even though it's about time travel, was reflecting what was going on, at the time that we were watching it. Was it January 1985? So I was just 11. I always thought the Viennese, Vastiel, the Viennesium's in Trial of a Time Lord, isn't it? Vastiel. Very, very handy. I mean, yeah, very, very handy to lock your key prisoner in with this very unstable stuff. But, you go, but they're storing it somewhere where it's cold. Yeah, I know. I think I can accept that. I suspect it's really nice. I've done it on audio, but I suspect it's really nice acting opposite Colin Baker on screen. He really invests in the person he's performing with, and there's an exchange of the dramatics. His dramatic delivery is very much based on the way that he's interacting with the other person. A lot of actors sort of take it amongst themselves, and their dramatics are a bit more declamatory, and that sort of sucks the attention into themselves. I always feel that Colin Baker is really good at engaging with the actors that he's on screen with, and that there's a respect there as well, which is a quality that, because it's quite a selfless quality, doesn't actually draw attention to itself particularly. I feel a bit sad now, because once these guys get inside, this is pretty much it for Bates, Stratton, and Griffiths, and I think it's a real waste of Brian Glover. But that's great Doctor Who scary stuff. A hand coming out of the darkness, grabbing somebody by the ankle and sort of pulling them away. But it's quite cursory, isn't it? It's quite blunt the way that they get him, and that's again brilliantly shot. I love the Lytton lying on the floor with the cyber feet around him, and then the shot almost from his point of view of the cyber loom, as it were, the Cybermen looming over him. It's pretty tough the way that they just go, well, we don't need him, and and it's too late, and we're going forward. But it's because Eric Saywood kind of loves Charlie Griffiths in the book, much of Attack of the Cybermen, much of which is told from his point of view. And indeed, I believe in his death scene, does he die with a smile on his face because he'd got out of his boring life and done something on an alien planet, and nobody would quite believe it, kind of thing. But I do think it's a slight waste of all of those characters. I mean, Stratton and Bates are set up to be a bit more key to the plot than they actually are. They're there essentially as cannon fodder. I like this. I remember this at the time, thinking there was something about the sort of inexorable way that the spark sort of moves up the Cyberman's arm and it can't do anything about it, which is pretty grim. It's like watching your own death. It's a bit like watching a sort of rat coming to gnaw your face off, but it's sparks going up your cyber arm. And I remember, I remember that from the time. This is I'm a sucker for a bit of self-sacrifice. That's how I want to go. I want to leave me. You go. I'll hold them off. That's how I want to go. So if you can arrange that, that's and again, Colin Baker gives it the sort of requisite gravitas. I would quite happily have a death scene with Colin Baker as the person to suggest the price being paid, as it were, because he's very good at that. Then I like these shots. I think these caves shrouded in the smoke are pretty decent sets. I suppose you never quite feel that they're a cave, because in a real cave, it's always, oh yes, they're caves, but they're very high ceilinged caves, because you have to have that to have the requisite level of light to make stuff visible in the studio. There's a lot more cryons than I suppose the cryons in the background of Threst's place are the same as the background cryons here. But I think the fingery stuff is quite the sort of like marionette fingers of the cryons is quite nice. Now this, I've just done an interview about whether this series is for a television program, about whether this series is too violent or not, and I think they'd wanted me to sort of err on the side that it was, but I have to be honest and say that I wanted Doctor Who to be violent. I may have sort of mentioned this last week. This was getting to the point where Doctor Who was occasionally seen as a bit ropey and a bit of a kids' program. So any suggestion of blood, and that's really effectively done. It's nicely acted by Colburn, but it's the very simple effect of there being blood on his crushed hands, but it is sadistic, and it is kind of sadistic without an awful lot of context. Or I suppose the argument is, if they knacker his body, that's a suggestion to us. Well, he's not going to recover from this, and so they're going to start turning him into a Cyberman. Which is the beginning of the end, and his journey to his sort of final moments. But it's worth noting how little Lytton and Griffiths sort of have to do after that first TARDIS scene, at the expense of a lot of stuff with the cryons, and I'm not sure as a viewer that's particularly where I want stuff to be. I don't know. Oh dear, the Doctor has escaped. And I quite like, she has quite a cool payoff line, does it? Oh, and this is quite grim, I seem to recall. when they kill her. But I'm not sure I'd remembered the crushed hands either. That's which is worth noting in and of itself, because I tended to notice moments where, green goo comes out of a Silurian's face or a Sea Devil's face, or the money shots, as you were, the head of Stengos, all the grim stuff. I very much was the stuff that I sort of took away with me a lot of the time, particularly because that was the stuff I thought would earn me brownie points with the kids at school. This is very well lit, this scene, actually, because I suspect it's all quite simple, little bits of flattage and lots of darkness, because it's a piece of scenery that's not seen very much. So I suspect that was done on a bit of a budget, and it's actually simple but effective, nice lighting, good use of shadow, well done there, everybody. But yes, I love the way that I like the Cryon's fingers, and I like the way she makes her lower the gun there. I'm actually quite enjoying the Cryons as a visual, apart from the dinner plate necks. I don't quite know what's going on there. Is that part of what they're wearing? If so, it's or because if that see-through stuff is the skin on their head, have they got like big gill necks? In which case that's a bit strange. Love a bit of cobweb. Sometimes a bit of cobweb is rather fun. And I like this idea of there's that they're rotting away because something's gone a bit wrong, and that we've got the distress signal. The Cybermen have one weakness. No, they don't. We've established in this story they've got about 1,000. They always react to the distress of another, which seems a little bit un-Cyberman-y, actually. My feeling is a Cyberman would go, if one's in trouble, what can we learn from that? Rather than we need to go and rescue that one. We only go and rescue that one if it's got something really important. Otherwise, nuts to you. It would be illogical. Now I remember this being, this being pretty grim, isn't it? Because they essentially chuck her outside to boil to death, which is pretty harsh. But I quite like her cussed response, and it's a terrible line. I don't have an instrument for measuring time. It's very slightly overblown-y, sci-fi stuff, but actually Faith Brown succeeds in making it a kind of sarky riposte. But this is pretty grim, and Banks's body language is absolutely magnificent. He's there going, I'm the cold, impassive thing, wall of steel, whereas she's the opposite of cold. She is a creature of movement and all of that. And I love that contrast to her trying to get in and Banks just standing there, and she's the organic boiling flesh and he's the cold steel. And I think that's pretty grim and very nicely done, and well done, Faith Brown. But this seems, I think, of and I mean it all happens in one camera shot as well, isn't it? It's a very sort of cheap end to, and it's never really quite clear what's going on. You don't know why he gets electrocuted, really. There's no explanation there, and then these guys just run off, and one camera at the end, and I mean you barely see Glover because of the blocking, and Jonathan David's in front of him. I think Glover and Griffiths and even Bates and Stratton deserved a little better than that to all be mowed down quite mercilessly. But I suppose part of Saywood's shtick is that life is merciless and harsh and cruel, which is why then having a Cyberman go, oh dear, we've got to get out of here, as one does in a minute, sometimes the blocking or individual choices or bits of direction are sometimes odd with when this thinks it's intergalactic the Sweeney. It's suddenly it can, there are sort of lapses or changes that reminds you that occasionally it's Doctor Who doing its best and not always quite managing. But this is all exciting. I love an exploding cyber chest. And yeah, so this was the bit that we saw in on Saturday Superstore, and it's quite a protracted death, and I like that light effect. And yeah, Sarah Green going, will Varn survive? And I think when this happened, You know, I expected something more because it had been sort of teased in Saturday Superstore, and it turns out it wasn't teased at all. It was just a massive spoiler because you never really see any of them again. And in fact, you know, if she'd lasted for a couple more minutes used to the plot, because you wouldn't have seen her again much after this anyway. So if she'd been a bit more careful, she could have survived. But it's almost like it's an Eric Saywood script. If somebody's got a chance to get killed, we will take that chance to. I'm just slightly surprised we didn't cut back to poor old Threst looking at a monitor, and Cyberman comes and kills her and her mates as well. So indeed, the baby is given, you know, he's given a few people a stay of execution. He's getting soppy in his old age. But of course, then we have this slightly stressed. Colin is so good at this. That touching her on the shoulder and giving her, he invests, he makes you important as another actor, as another character in the drama. And I think that, and he's very good at those just tiny sort of touching little moments, often in quite ridiculous or scenes that or scenes that are slightly flawed, that just need a little of injection of humanity is the wrong word because he's not a particularly human doctor, but of empathy, of character interaction. But yes, and this is quite grim for old Lytton, and I think, you know, as somebody who liked Lytton and liked the idea of him coming back, when it gets clear that, you know, they brought him back to kill him. Oh, and I like that. I remember laughing out loud when the Doctor is actually quite pleased that it's hit the TARDIS shape, and that's quite a nice trick to play on the audience to make them furious that you know, that the TARDIS may not now be doing the thing that we know and love it for. And playing with our expectation, I think that's quite fine. And I do like the way that Colin Baker pats it affectionately, as if to go, I actually quite like it that things go wrong. And and it's a good lesson for life, and a very good lesson for Doctor Who is to sort of treat shortcomings with a certain rueful pleasure, in a way, to sort of go, it's quite nice to be reminded that actually nothing's perfect, and you have to be like that to be a Doctor Who fan, because Doctor Who, for all its brilliance, you know, it treads a fine line. It's about somebody travelling through space and time in a police box that's bigger on the inside than it is on the outside. It's about a benign, funny alien doing sci-fi adventures that vary from the outlandish to the scary to the, you know, extremely ambitious to the sometimes misconceived. And you have to, all produced, you know, on multi-camera BBC budget. And so the fact that the TARDIS doesn't quite work properly and goes wrong, the fact that that's slightly reassuring is almost a comment on Doctor Who itself. Now, Cybermen killing each other seem to be the way, and I seem to recall in the Peladon books that, you know, there was a thing of the ice warriors sort of almost ended up by accident shooting the Ice Lord and vice versa, and it happened a bit with in my head with the Cybermen as well, or certainly when the lieutenant and the leader both kill each other there, that seemed like, oh, is that what Cybermen do now? And that takes the Doctor out of the equation, and you are thinking, oh well, you see, but what they're doing there is it's meaning that the Doctor doesn't have to partake in any of the destruction, and then he shoots the cyber controller to bits, and then gets to be sad about Lytton, and Lytton, I suppose, got to help there. That's the leg it, Nigel. That's it. Somebody, I think, has said, you know, I can't remember who said that, but credit to somebody said that those is it the discontinuity guide? I don't think they put Nigel though, but yeah, that idea of, oh, quick, we gotta get out. But you know, all Lytton really did there was stab the cyber controller on the shoulder with some pliers. But yes, he was helping the Cryons. I think that's brilliant in the acting from Colin, but I think the script is wanting to accept that because we're told it much more than maybe that it earns it. I feel Lytton and Griffiths, as I say, sort of faded a bit there, which was a shame. But as I say, I like the Cryons, and I think the way that the controller bats, you know, attacks the Doctor, it was quite vicious there. Oh, they get credited before Bates and Stratton. That's very interesting to me. monsters before humans, unusual, but I suppose Banks and Kilgarriff are kind of returning, talent from the past. Oh, M.A.C. Adams, he's just passed away, the film editor, Mac Adams. But yes, I think the way that the cyber controller sort of, it's quite harshly smacks the Doctor about is almost psychopathic there, Kilgarriff, in his final sort of flourish. So there we go. It's tonally quite uneven, but I know some people who really don't like Attack of the Cybermen. I think I prefer the first half to the second half, if I'm honest. But I actually quite enjoyed the Cryons there, watching them certainly as a design. I think I admire them more for what they're aiming for than necessarily what they pull off, maybe. And as I say, I think I could have done with a bit more. I think I could have done with a bit more somehow tying in what Bates and Stratton and Griffiths are up to in that second episode with the larger plot, with the wider plot, because otherwise just feels like Saywood's gone, well, I've brought all these characters in to make it exciting when they die. But then even then, Bates, Stratton and Griffiths all die in the same scene. Almost, I mean, I thought it was one shot, but there's two camera setups, one from 1/3 up the corridor and then one at the end of the corridor. But it's quite a sort of cursory part of the storytelling. It's obviously only a handful of flats, and it's done with great economy and well done for doing it, and broadening the canvas. But it does mean it just feels a little bit cursory. And yes, that dissatisfaction. You could say, well, that's the writer going, life is hell, war is hell, life is cheap. In space, no one can hear you die unnecessarily in a subplot that's not gone very far. And it buys us that those moments where we learn that Lytton's not all that bad. But again, they make no attempt to reconcile that with the guy we knew from Resurrection of the Daleks. So it's sort of telling us, but I think without much sort of evidential backup, apart from what he's doing for the Cryons, but they don't sort of they never weigh that up with all of the other stuff that we know about him. And I don't think it's because there wasn't time, because I thought some of that episode was quite a lot of sort of chat or sort of actiony sequences that weren't necessarily giving us an awful lot. Although I did like all the Toomey stuff. So anyway, I've got to choose two things and a bonus that I like about Attack of the Cybermen. And what did I choose? I chose Brian Glover, and I chose the sort of London Euston-y stuff, Euston Filmsy stuff. What do I like about part 2? Well, I do like the idea of the of the cyber rejects. I think they're a reasonable sort of variation on the myth, and it does lead to that nice scene where Atwell, who does it very well, strips his glove off and really squeezes Griffith's hand, and I think that's all very well done. So yeah, the sort of cyber rejecty, that and the fact that it has that sort of tough guy element that is echoed in the stuff in part 1, the gangster Euston Filmsy stuff. The fact that you've got Michael Atwell doing it and being this sort of tough, bringing this sort of tough London attitude, which again was not massively usual for Doctor at the time, when villains tended to be sort of RP and that sort of thing, and that there's a sort of working class sort of Cockney people in Doctor Who tended to be sort of cheapy or chirpy supporting characters or factotums or soldiers. I can't like that sort of gritty thing. But is that a good enough thing to say? Or is it that I like the outside, the planet's surface stuff, the quarry? I do like the quarry. And I like I like the Cryons movements. I like the Cryons. I think I'm going to say the Cryons. I don't think they're 100% successful, but I don't quite know why, apart from maybe the plate gillnecks. But I do like the movement. I do like the thing of going, well, let's make them, sort of all feminine, but with moustache. I like women with moustaches, is what I'm saying. But if they're from space, I think there's quite a lot of creativity got into them, and quite a lot of imagination gone into them. So I'm going to say the Cryons, and the Cyber Rejects. And I think I'm going to say for my bonus thing is the violence. Because as a kid, the exploding cyber heads, and even though as I say, I've never quite forgiven them for not making the Cybermen invincible, but all of that stuff, and the machine guns, and the action sequences, and the crushed hands, and all of that, and the spurting goo was absolutely the stuff I lapped up. Now, of course, it's what ultimately led to Doctor Who's hiatus and all sorts of issues. And I do think I have a very complicated relationship with it, because I also acknowledge the fact that some of it, maybe goes too far, and was it suitable for the time period. But as a kid, it's sort of what I wanted. And I think you can do violence within context. I don't think Saywood always gets it, because I know he wanted the Doctor to shoot 2 guards in Resurrection of the Daleks, and that was in his script, and he's always gone, well, when you get involved in violent situations, sometimes violence is a consequence. The whole point of Doctor Who is that that's not what the Doctor does, I sort of think. And yes, I know the Doctor does sometimes kill people, but and it's maybe hypocritical to go, well, the Doctor does it at a distance, but then shouldn't do it, in terms of directly. And then I go, well, actually, that's hypocritical, because in the same way that I get annoyed with people who, don't like being confronted with the fact that animals are killed for meat, but will happily buy something from a supermarket. And you go, well, so you don't mind, so long as you don't have to see it being done or do it yourself. And I think, well, no, I think it's the opposite. If you're prepared to do it yourself, I think you're entitled to do what you want. But anyway, so I don't know. Do you know what? I've got a big dilemma here, because I don't know that I do like that, because I certainly don't like the Doctor killing things, but I did like the adult. I mean, it's not massively adult, is it? It's got comedy organ music, when it's got sad cyberhead and all of that sort of stuff, but it's got Faith Brown melting in it, but that's pretty grim. That's a good scene, isn't it? That's a good scene. All right. What am I going for? I'm going for, I like my so I've got 2 things for this episode and a bonus thing. I'm going to go for, I like the Cryons, even though they're not 100% successful, and I think we spend a little too much time talking to them. I like Faith Brown's death scene, particularly that contrast between her and David Banks. And I like Matthew Robinson's direction. I think that means that I can have the toughness and some of the violence, but I think it's partially to do with a kind of attitude he has, and a kind of backbone that he gives it. I think there are some lapses in choice sometimes, especially when we go for some of the comedy side of it. Which Resurrection of the Daleks actually has less of, and I think Resurrection is actually slightly better directed than Attack. But I still think Matthew Robinson is one of the few 80s directors who you can go, but I can actually single you out as a director, because I can see your individual flavour as a director that you bring to it, and he does bring to it a sort of toughness and an aptitude for action and an uncompromising style that lends itself well, particularly I think, to the 2 scripts that he gets. So the Cryons, Faith Brown's death scene, Matthew Robinson, they are my 2 things and my bonus thing. 3 in total. Now then, Robin Bunce is going to choose his things. I should have thought of a better word than things, shouldn't I? Attack of the Cybermen, episode 2. What's he chosen?
Episode 2, and yet more delights for us to sink our teeth into. My 2 picks, and then a third pick which kind of encompasses the whole story. My first pick is going to surprise some. Malcolm Clarke's music in this story is not universally loved, but I have a lot of time for it. I'm not thinking so much about the themes that Malcolm Clarke writes for this story or this episode. I'm thinking more about his use of texture, his use of kind of dissonance, to express the kind of emotional turmoil which is happening during this episode. So I'm thinking about the moment where the Cyberman is being shot at point blank range in the head in the TARDIS. That kind of very crunchy, dissonant chord, very electronic textures. Love that, love that, love that. I do like the recurrence of the cyber theme, which of course we first heard in Earthshock. And I just love the way that Malcolm Clarke is using analog synthesizers. It sounds like he's using the CS80, the classic Yamaha synthesizer, which was, very, very big in the late 70s and early 80s. I like the way that he's constructed this kind of sound universe, which is kind of glassy and cold and slightly and there's a lot of ring modulation in there, particularly the kind of ring modulation bell sound that he's created, which just kind of seems to epitomise and encompass everything that the Cybermen represent. So there we are, Malcolm Clarke's music. That's my first pick. My second pick from this episode is Lytton's death. I have to say I do love Maurice Colborne. If I'm saying his name wrong, forgive me. But yeah, I love him. I saw him first, I think, in Day of the Triffids, I think in 1981, and I adored him in that, and I adored that entire production. I didn't see much of the Peter Davison years, as I said earlier, but I did watch the Dalek episode, so I was kind of aware of Lytton as a character from that. I liked him. I do like mercenary characters. There's a lot of kind of moral complexity there, and I like the fact that this is his kind of redemption. This story in this episode particularly is his redemption, and yes, and his death is very, very moving. I think it's played enormously well. I like the way that his death brings out the Doctor's humanity again. And again, it's a different kind of humanity. There's a kind of vulnerability to the Sixth Doctor, and I guess we sometimes think of the Sixth Doctor as kind of pompous and kind of self-regarding, but there is this kind of undercurrent of kind of self-doubt in Colin Baker's performance, and Lytton's death allows Colin Baker to kind of perform both aspects of the Doctor's character, and it also allows Nicola Bryant to come in. And I think I like the way that Perry has her own moral compass all the way through these 2 episodes. She's not simply saying yes, Doctor. She's thinking about things from her own point of view, and Lytton's death kind of allows all of those things to come through. Obviously, the kind of torturing of Lytton's conversion leading up to his death, all of that is kind of very interesting as well, and it's very video nasty, appropriate to the era, I guess. So yeah, so Lytton's death, that's my second pick. So finally then, what do I like about these episodes combined, my kind of overall pick? I think the thing I haven't really mentioned so far is the Cybermen, and this is what I like about this show. I think this show, more than any other Cyberman story in the classic era, really explores what the Cybermen are and what's distinctive about them as villains. So yes, we see the conversion process in this second episode, and it's kind of hinted at previously in the first episode as well. We see the conversion process much more fully than we see in any other episode of the classic era. And we also have a huge amount of cyber history thrown in. So there's callbacks to Mondas, there's callbacks to Telos, Cybermen in the sewers. Presumably they've been knocking around since the 70s or whenever it was that the invasion episode took place. So I love the fact that this takes the Cybermen seriously. I love the fact it's rooted in this fictional history of the cyber race. And I mentioned H.G. Wells earlier, I'm going to mention H.P. Lovecraft here. I think the thing that Paula Moore is doing in this episode by the constant references back to cyber history is she's creating what H.P. Lovecraft calls a background of evil verisimilitude. Try that again. A background of evil verisimilitude. That is to say, she's creating this kind of fictional world that we believe in because we've seen it before. And again, that makes everything more plausible. So there we are. I love this. I think this is by far the best Cyberman story of the classic era, at least in colour. Okay, I'm going to back off that. I'm getting a bit excited. Yeah, at least it's the best Cyberman story of the colour era. So I enjoyed this enormously. As I say, this is the show which rekindled my love of Doctor Who back in 1985, and I owe it a great deal for that. I've always loved watching it. I was so excited when they released it on VHS. I was so excited when the BBC released it on Blu-ray, and on DVD, and I'm looking forward to the BBC releasing it on Blu-ray. So I hope you enjoyed this story as much as I did. And you know, a day watching Attack of the Cybermen is always a good day. I hope you felt that too. Plugs. I should plug some stuff, shouldn't I? Well, if you want to read about my thoughts about Doctor Who, get Doctor Who and Philosophy bigger on the inside and read my chapter about the Daleks. It caused a bit of a stir when it came out, and yes, it gives a different account of the Daleks' origins than the one which is usually kind of put out there. Secondly, 12th Night. It's a book about the Peter Capaldi era. I've got a chapter in there about the politics of Peter Capaldi's first 2 seasons. It contains punishing detail, lots of references to all kinds of political philosophy and political events. You'll love it. Finally, I am a host on Shoulder of Orion, the official Blade Runner podcast. When I'm not thinking about Doctor Who, I'm thinking about Blade Runner. So you know, why not join us on Shoulder of Orion, available in all good podcast outlets. Sorry, that sentence ran out of steam a little bit there. Anyway, lovely seeing you, Toby. I look forward to seeing you in April, when we're going to be talking about Nigel Kneale and 1984 in the Cambridge Festival Ideas. And if that happens to be in the past, it was great seeing you. You were amazing. Take care, Toby.
Oh, bless him. I love that contribution, especially as I actually thought I kind of ran out of steam there. And it's nice that, isn't it nice, obviously, because we have a genuine advocate for the story and for the episodes, who I think perhaps made up for some of my shortcomings, because I do feel that in my heart of hearts, and going into this, if you'd said to me, "Oh, you'll be choosing anything to do with the Cryons for episode 2," I'd gone, "Nah," because they're not great. But I actually, watching them this time round, they seem to be, to me, to be the most visually interesting, the most pleasant surprise. And I even like the way they were shot in some of those wide shots as well, but they also sustained a close up and all of that. And I was, I think, appreciating the ambition rather than the success. But I think it's because the things I like about the story particularly tail off a bit in part 2, because I like Lytton, I like Griffiths, I like the toughness, and there's less of that. And I think also because I'm certainly not with Robin in it being the best cyber story of the colour era, because I'm a child of Earthshock, and I remember the extreme effect that Earthshock had on me, and nothing was ever going to quite match that. And also, I remember Resurrection of the Daleks, and I see this as a companion piece to Resurrection of the Daleks, because it's Matthew Robinson again, because it's Maurice Colborne again. But I think Resurrection is a slightly more complete production. There's problems with the script, I know, but in terms of, I think, and this is where I didn't choose Malcolm Clarke's music where Robin did, because I can't quite forgive the little comedy interludes that Malcolm Clarke sprinkles in, which I know are in cahoots with the director and the business some of the actors throw in. But that to me means it's a slightly more sort of schizophrenic tone, and sometimes that's what Doctor Who does so brilliantly. It can do deep seriousness and then something very silly, and the things work hand in hand. But they work better when they, and this is, I think, where some of the alchemy of Doctor Who comes in, where all the disparate elements somehow hold together, even though they shouldn't. So a scene will make you cry, even though it's slap bang next to a scene where it's got some highfalutin, ludicrous sci-fi concept that everyone's playing with a terribly straight face, or even throws a joke into and winks at the audience slightly. And I'm not sure I feel that Attack melds quite as well. Even though there's still loads that I love, it's certainly... and I did watch it once and went, oh dear, this isn't very good. This is about 10, 15 years ago, where I changed my mind on it slightly because it had always been a story that I'd enjoyed. Because it's quite action-packed. I like the action adventures. So sometimes my go-to Doctor Who is one that's got lots of explosions and lots of deaths and all of that. And I think it fits the bill there very, very nicely. I think Robin is absolutely right to highlight how Colin Baker, for all his spikiness, for all his alienness, he does give real weight to moments of death or moments of self-sacrifice, and he has a sort of wistful self-reflection among the spikiness. And I think I was talking about other stuff during Lytton's death scene, which was one of Robin's key choices. And I don't know, maybe it's because I was talking all the way through it this time, but I don't know. Well, anyway, it's nice that Robin articulated different things from me and articulated them so well, because I think maybe my second half was slightly unfocused, and maybe slightly had emphasis in the wrong place, and wasn't brilliantly thought through or put together. But in a way, I can forgive myself for that, because that is kind of my feelings about the second episode itself. So I can sort of say my commentary was thematically apt, and then in comes Robin and puts but does what Happy Times and Places should do, is puts an absolutely positive spin on so much of it, and did so with great with great articulatedness, and so do check out all of his work. And sadly, so I'm betrayed by time, of course, because yes, when Robin did this, season 22 was not out on Blu-ray, which it is now. I hope you're enjoying it. I'm on the commentary for Revelation of the Daleks, which was nice because it means I got to do a BBC commentary with Colin Baker. And for years, I'd never actually done a BBC commentary with any Doctor. And I've got to do some with Tom now, and I've got to do do one with Colin as well. So I've got to share a commentary with a Doctor, which I hadn't done until pretty late in the day, and I was glad to be there when Colin completed his, because he'd not done Revelation because he'd been off on tour or something, so hadn't been available for the dates. So it's important to get the Doctor on as many as possible. But I didn't end up going to the Cambridge Institute of Ideas, or the Festival Ideas that he'd arranged, and he was so very understanding. I sort of chickened out. My Shez was very ill, and I was very reluctant about travelling because of COVID and all sorts of other things, and so I backed out in the end. So Robin, I'm afraid history has made a liar of you, because I wasn't brilliant. I wasn't there. I was not there. I do not remember it, which is very appropriate, seeing as we were talking about 1984. It has been erased from a history that never happened, even though in your version of history there it had, and it went brilliantly. So there, that too is my own inadequacy is thematically apt once again. So at least, yeah. At least, my failure always reflects some form of subtext or thematic appropriate's. So, so yeah. At least it's a failure, that absolutely works in context. And I think maybe that's a metaphor for my life in general. Anyway, look, I hope you enjoyed Attack of the Cybermen. I hope if you didn't enjoy Attack of the Cybermen before, you've enjoyed it a little bit more this time. I hope I accentuated the positive as much as because, as I say, I find that a perfectly enjoyable episode to watch. And particularly the first episode. But I don't think it quite... I think it could do with another draft, maybe. But that's sort of nitpicking. I would perfectly happily sit watch that adventure. I just found it slightly more difficult to talk about than maybe I'd anticipated. But that's all right. Anyway, I'm going to open the back door now because it's really hot, even though it's late at night. And I'll let Bernard the dog out. And then when he tries to come back in, I shall stand impassively and watch him melt. I'm not going to melt the dog. There's taking thematic reflections a little bit too far. So anyway, thanks very much for viewing and listening, and I hope I haven't misjudged a Doctor Who episode, in this case, Attack of the Cybermen Part 2. Goodbye. Well, thank you ever so much for listening to Happy Times and Places, which is presented by me, Toby Hadoke, and my special guest this time around was Robin Bunce, who you can follow on Twitter at RenegadesRobin, and both of those R's are in capital letters. If that matters, I know not whether it does or doesn't. I'm grateful to Robin and to the patrons who make these podcasts possible, and they include Ruben Herfindahl, Ian K. McLachlan, Philip Marsh, Nathan Martin, Roland Moore, Rick Moran, Kevin Murdoch, Graham Knott, Adam Parker, Barry Platt, Risto Matti Sarillo, Frank Shales, Andrew and Lisa, Catherine Armitage, John Arnold, Kevin Ashleford, Luke Adkins, James Bell, David Bickley, Will Brooks, Gary Byrne, Robin Bland, Robbie C., Alex Kafajoglu, Paul Carnahan, Paul Carrington, Andy Case and Ian Clark. The music is by Dave Gates and the artwork by Dylan Patterson. You too can become a patron by going to patreon.com/Toby Hadoke. And you can also support these podcasts at kofi.com/Toby Hadoke. Or you can just go to Patreon, Podbean, Spotify, pick up a Podbean, I was going there, or Apple, and they're even on YouTube now, anywhere where these are available, and give some good reviews and those 5-star ratings, which really help to just make more people aware of these, which would be lovely and really helpful. So all of those different places you can support these, or simply by word of mouth, or telling your friends, but mostly I'm just grateful to you for listening and getting this far. As I mentioned, these are now available on YouTube. I have a YouTube channel, Toby Hadoke. I'm also on Instagram at toby.hadoke, and I put videos and bits and bobs there about my comedy as well, should that be of interest to you. If it's not, then Twitter is very helpful, or X as they call it now. This is an X Twitter, because I have at Hadoke Podcasts, which is just about these podcasts, but I also have at Toby Hadoke, should you be interested in anything I might be doing outside the world of Doctor Who podcasting. I also have a Facebook page, and my website is tobyhadoke.com. Since recordings, I've no idea what I did of as the post credits chat on Attack of the Cybermen. It was so long ago. I always redo the opening and closing credits when I do an omnibus version. I've no idea why. I think I just like making life difficult for myself. But since this was recorded, I've been to Nicola Bryant's house. There we go. Have I done anything else Attack of the Cybermen related? She's got a lovely house, you know. She's she's got a good eye, beautiful. I mean, I'd already been for the cookbook, Doctor Who cookbook DVD extra, but I've since been again, and it's always nice to see Nicola and her lovely doggies, and Nev, and they're a lovely household, and yeah. It's a beautiful place, and as you can imagine, for such a stunning lady, she has a fantastic eye, and the house is really, really nicely done. So that's nice, isn't it? That's nice. So there we go. I don't know if that's any use to you, if that was worth hanging around right till the end for, but I have this tradition of leaving a final word, and I think for this one I had very little inspiration. I'm sorry about that.